which features Axel, so I think it's no introduction. Yeah. So he's gonna talk about what logical pluralism cannot be.
Thank you so much, exactly.
Do you mind being interrupted? Would you like?
Yes, if you have it. Well, no, actually. Okay, I'm going to give some caveats at the beginning. But first, I'm going to say thank you to the organizers, the people who organized this. It has been very good. And also thank you, because I know that 3 o'clock is a very strange time to have a talk here in Mexico. And there are so many other talks that you could be attending this afternoon. You can go and hear Sofia talk about Sor Juana. You're still in time. If you want to go to that, that's going to be good. Lara is talking on Hegel, just on the other room. She's also very good, so you could also do that. And of course, Maria is going to be in a round table also in a few minutes. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be in an hour. And I'm pretty sure that is going to be also very, very good. So if you leave in a few minutes, completely understandable. If you don't, then we can talk about what logical pluralism cannot be. If you remember from the first program, there was going to be another talk about what logical pluralism could be, but it seems I beat it by default. So we won. Okay, so the idea is, yeah. So what logical pluralism cannot be, and the short answer, so that this is not like a suspense movie, right? This is just a talk, is that it cannot be the thesis that there are more than one negation or more than one logical consequence, more than one true relation of logic or correct account of negation and things like that. I'm going to try to argue that that is not a very helpful way of presenting logical pluralism, independently of whether pluralism is right or wrong. Just in order to help the debate, I don't think this is a very helpful way of doing it. So it's a very modest goal I'm trying to pursue, is because I'm trying to push the debate to become even more clearer about what is being discussed, because there are so many things that are being discussed under the big umbrella term of logical pluralism. So I'm going to try to push people to be more clear about what they mean. And here's the important caveat: for you to enjoy the talk, which I hope you do, you have to remember that playing dumb is to understanding what playing devil's advocate is to truth. Okay? So this means that heuristically, to play dumb is what I'm going to do, right? So you're going to go to some slides and going to like, come on, Axel, you know what that means. When I'm asking like, what does you mean by this, right? But that's the point, because the point is like trying to improve our understanding of what is at stake and how better to frame the pluralism debate. So that is my goal. So that is why, even if you want to make some, you can make some like clarificatory question while I'm talking, but a lot of time maybe I'm going to go like, oh yeah, I wish I knew. And it's going to be because of this. Okay, so those are my 2 caveats, but this talk has a plan, fortunately. So I'm going to start by asking, what do people mean when they use, for example, negation or logical consequence in plural, right? What do they mean when they say logical consequences or logical consequence relation or negations or disjunctions or things like that? I'm going to present some examples. Then I'm going to say, like, what does that have to do? What does using these terms that are commonly understood in singular, in plural, what does it have to do with pluralism? I'm going to present then 4 ways in which we may think we can use plurals when we're doing philosophy of logic or when we're doing logic. Some of them are going to be unproblematic, others are going to be problematic, right? I'm going to talk about taxonomic uses, but I'm going to focus mostly on the third part about how can we use the plural in order to talk about logical rivalry and whether we can use plural in order to talk about logical rivalry in the context of pluralism. I'm going to say that there's going to be a lot of problems there. We're going to talk about whether somebody has to adopt some form of paraconsistent or conciliatory strategy in order to be a pluralist within a debate on logical rivalry, and some problems with trying to use a linguistic solution that appeals to some form of equivocation, which is a very common pluralist strategy. Then I'm going to go to the last hypothesis, whether what we mean when we use something like negation is plural is we're talking about competing hypotheses regarding what negation is, and then draw some general conclusions, right? So that is the plan. So let's start, with the question, right? What do the people mean when they use negation, logical consequence, logic, etc. in plural? So the talk could start here because that is the main question. And of course, the answer is going to be, I don't know. It doesn't seem to make much sense to me. Maybe you. I'm sorry? Because the talk could start here, right? So. Okay, so here's the example, right? So here comes from Blair. If one treated adverbs as properties of events, it is much easier to treat sentences that contain negations. And there's negations in plural, right? So this is the kind of sentences where people use negation in plural. The first sentence is a conjunction of two negations, and the second is a negation of a disjunction. Their negation is also in plural, and negation here has an A there, right? So that is also tells us that negation is seen like some kind of a count noun, like a predicate, not as a proper noun. And that is kind of odd, right? This comes from Crawford. Negations and disjunctions of perfectly respectable properties are themselves perfectly respectable properties. This comes from a metaphysics paper, right? From Kaplan, 2006. It is useful to consider the question of what properties an operator needs to have to count as a genuine negation. This is a very strange expression because it has the A there. So like there are many negations and some of them are genuine or they are not. What does that mean, right? This is surely the fundamental, and also this is, according to Davide, this is a very important issue, right? This is surely the fundamental philosophical question about negation, and their negation now is a proper noun, right? It's no longer a predicate. So in order to understand negation, we have to understand negations. Okay. And it would be answered before we can adjudicate the justice of the most common complaint raised against various non-classical negations, again in plural, that they are not really negations. So there are some negations that are not really negations. This is interesting, at least, right? So yeah, it would be good to try to understand what does the VD mean there and people who have said similar things. We found little evidence that children, this is from a psychology paper, we found little evidence that children distinguish the two types of disjunctions. And again, there is disjunction in plural, but at least they tell us what are those two. They are the inclusive and exclusive disjunctions. So there are at least two disjunctions. So you can see it's not just a problem with negation. People say these kind of things all the time. Logical consequence. There are at least two distinct relations of logical consequence, as we know Bill said in 2002. And there's, this is my niece, by the way. I don't think, I think so. I don't know. But I took that picture that day, she was jumping. The idea is to define relations in plural of logical consequence from Lacy. Non-contractive logics are not legitimate. Again, they're not genuine, they're not legitimate relations in plural of logical consequence. This is from Elia Sardini, friend of the Institute, friend of mine, really cool dude. Different relations of logical consequence yield different logics. What does that even mean? Ferrari and Maruzzi, right, from 2020, the concept of logical consequence, although admits of different relations of logical consequence, has a unity, right? So they even thought it is plural, there's a unity of all the different relations of logical consequence, right? So I'm going to try to make sense. Oh, there's another one. Again, from Ferrari and Maruzzi. The basic idea is that the concept of logical consequence, singular, has some core features that allow for different relations to count as logical consequence. So different relations in plural are logical consequence in singular. What is going on, right? Different logics capture different extra systematic consequence relations in plural, but all meet a select set of criteria for logicality. This is from Stell 2023. So the question is whether there's something like a logical property that makes some, like a logical operator, be a negation and is useful to the logical pluralist debate. So another way of making my main question is this. When we talk in plural, when we use negation as a predicate, not as a noun, is it naming a logical property, like something that really makes a logical operator be a negation or a relation be one of logical consequence? Is there something there That is what we mean when we use this kind of predicates, and whether to acknowledge these can be helpful to further the debate surrounding logical pluralism, right? So this is another way of phrasing my main question. And because, again, this is not a suspense movie, I'm going to try to defend that. Not really. There really isn't such a property, or at least not one that is helpful to the pluralist, right? So we're going to have some that are going to be well-defined, but they're not interesting for... I'm going to repeat a lot of the things you said. I am sorry. For some reasons that you already heard a couple of hours ago, there are some way of using these predicates in the plural that are very well-defined, very well-behaved. There's no problem with them, but they're not very helpful to really be a genuine pluralist. And the ones that would seem to be more helpful to the pluralists are actually kind of messy, present a lot of challenges. That is why this workshop is called Challenges to Logical Pluralism. So that is why I say not really instead of just not. Because yeah, maybe you could, but you're going to face some challenges, some important challenges that you're going to have to solve before you can genuinely use these predicates. Okay? So, why pluralism, right? So, what we want is notion of logical consequences or logical negations or logical disjunctions that helps further the debate surrounding logical pluralism. So it's important to at least take a few seconds to remember why is there even such a thing as a debate of logical pluralism? Why some people are logical pluralists, why some people are not, so why are we all here, what is going on, right? So in an oldish paper, that like a lot of papers nowadays come out many years after you write them, I give this characterization, right? So I say, in logic, like many other theoretical endeavors, it is not rare to find questions like what follows from what, or how logical negation behaves, for which even after appropriate and conscientious inquiry, there remain conflicting and equally well-grounded potential answers, each one recovering different intuitions and prior theoretical commitments. So the idea is that the reason why there's even debates around logical pluralism is because we have competing logics, and we have tried to decide among them, and after centuries, we've seemed to reach a stalemate. So we're at least exploring what I call conciliatory strategies, like pluralism, to try to say, okay, the reason why we haven't been able to solve this thing is because, and then there are a lot of options, because the question wasn't well formulated, because they're both equally right, etc., etc. Okay, so that is why we even have a debate. So the idea is that if the plural is going to serve, if these supposedly logical properties are going to serve us, is because they're going to serve us to make sense of this, to solve this problem. Okay, so that is what I'm aiming at. So again, my main hypothesis is going to be that logical pluralism cannot be the thesis, that there are more than one negation, logical consequence, etc. Right? That presenting a thesis that way is not going to be able to help us explain why we have reached this kind of stalemates. Okay, so that is the hypothesis. So let's start. Let's start to the different uses. I'm going to start, of course, with the less controversial ones, so just to cleanse our palate. We'll talk in plural of negations and things like that. For example, to talk about occurrences of the logical operator negation. So when we say that this formula has two negations or things like that, or formulas and subformulas whose main operator is a negation. We saw a lot of examples a couple of examples in the slides, in the previous slides. So when we say something like, the negation of a disjunction is a logical equivalent or not to a conjunction of negations. We use negation in this sense. There's no problem there. We also use it to talk about sentences and other expressions and thoughts whose logical form is expressed by any of the above, like in the example we saw in metaphysics, where people talk about the negation, some properties and their negations, right? So there, it is not a sentence that is being negated or anything like that. You talk about properties as being negative and some properties being negation of other. That makes perfect sense because we assume some sort of relation between the sentences of our the formulas of our artificial logical languages and whatever it is that we want to apply them to. And this person applied it to properties, and that is why this person could talk about some properties being the negation of others, right? Because we also use, and this is unproblematic, right? I don't think I have to spend a lot of time talking about this, how this is not problematic. So that out of the way, let's see another way that I also think is unproblematic. Okay, but when I say that it's unproblematic, I am also meaning that this has nothing to do with logical pluralism, right? I mean, the logical monist has no problem talking this way, and just because you accept sentences where more than one occurrence of negation, that doesn't make you a pluralist regarding negation, right? I don't think that has to be controversial in any sense. Another use that we can use, that's horrible, right? But whatever. We also use the plural when we're just doing taxonomy, right? Logic and the philosophy of logic is a science that requires classifications, right? In order to formulate some hypotheses, we need to group maybe sometimes operators together or formulas or systems, and we devise names for those, right? And because these are taxonomies, of course, they're going to be predicate, and so we can, for instance, classify certain operations as negations, for example, because that can be helpful to, among other things, make comparisons between logics or make general claims within or across logics, right? This is a very helpful tool for doing metalogic, for doing logic itself, and for doing the philosophy of logic, right? We are using these terms for taxonomical reasons. And that is okay, that makes perfect sense. But again, this is not the kind of thing that is helpful to the pluralist, right? Because the pluralist is trying to reconciliate things that are already together, right? You're not bringing them together. Because taxonomies are shallow, right? They are tools we develop in order to put forth some theories, right? That is why, for example, if we read Omori and Wansik, who talks about negative operators, they themselves recognize, right? This classification is, needless to say, that is kind of pretty obvious, not meant to be rigorous, but just a rough classification, right? So this is just for heuristic reasons. We group these operators as negations or as implications or as conjunctions, just to stress certain similarities, right? And we can stipulate that these formal features or these logical features that these things have in common are going to make them be all negations or whatever, right? We can do that. That is no problem. But it's a stipulation, right? Here's Catherine Deed. She's talking about something completely different, but I like this quote. Occasionally, there was no reason to give something a new label other than differentiation for differentiation's sake, right? So if you're using these properties just for taxonomy, you're not saying anything very deep about them. But there's close to things that may be really substantial and therefore can be helpful in order to formulate the pluralist hypothesis. So let's move to them, right? Because again, remember, my question was, what do people mean when they talk about negations in plural, for example? Like, is there something there that is more than just taxonomy? Is there something like more substantial that we want to reconciliate in order to formulate a form of logical pluralism? And somebody already replied to me in a previous version. Of course, what about intuitionist and classical logical negation? These seem to be negations in plural and not in any of the previous senses. This is not a shallow classification. There are certainly different negations in the deeper sense, right? Because intuition is considered a negation of phase, an abbreviation for, you have both things. You have, again, as in the quotes I mentioned before, intuition is talking about negations, or at least philosophers who study intuitionism talking about negation both in plural and singular. So there seems to be something substantial there. And it seems pretty clear to me that conciliating intuitionist and classical logical negation in a single logical theory would certainly count as a form of logical pluralism, right? So this seems to be the kind of things we are looking for when we talk about negations in plural in the context of logical pluralism. So let's look at what do we mean when we say that intuitionist and classical negation are both negations or even genuine logical negations. Let's see. So what does intuitionism say? And if we go to this is from like an encyclopedia, like a very canonical formulation of what intuitionism is. You're going to read things like that the essential part of the intuitionist project is to abandon classical logic in favor of intuitionistic logic, right? So this means that part of being an intuitionist is to be a monist, right? So if you're an intuitionist, then you think there is one negation, and that negation is intuitionist negation, right? So this means, and the same thing for a classical logician, right? Part of what it is to be a classical logician is to think that there is only one true logic, which is classical logic, and there's only one true negation, and the negation behaves the way that God gave us, whatever, right? With explosion and all those beautiful, beautiful things that negation, classical negation has. And that's the way negation works, right? The debate is about the logic of negation in singular, right? The way that intuitionism is presented, the way the debate is usually presented, always uses the singular because they are talking about negation, not about negations, right? It is the pluralist who's introducing this predicate in order to turn these two monisms into one pluralism, right? So the debate is about the logic of negation in singular, including how best to formally characterize its logical behavior. So if this is so, then there is something strange about trying to use this predicate in order to, it's self-defeating to try to use this predicate in order to formulate the pluralist hypothesis. And here's just a very simple argument that has already come out implicitly, but I'm making it here more explicit, right? So the first premise is that according to intuitionism, there's only one negation. According to classical logic, there is only one negation. According to logical pluralism, both intuitionism and classical logic are correct. We can even add are correct about negation. Therefore, according to logical pluralism, there is only one negation, right? This seems to point towards some problem, right? And the question is, what are the options for the pluralist? Are we going to reject any of the premise? Are we going to do something else about trying to make this non-paradoxical? Are we going to reject the conclusion? What are the options that the pluralist has? Or should the pluralist just reject the very idea of talking about their pluralist project in terms of more than one negation? Solid. I'm sorry. It is not logical. It is not even. But yeah, and why not?
Oh, because the conclusion assumes the classical negation and the intuitionist negation are the same. They're not. So it doesn't follow that there is only one. We're talking about different kinds of negation.
That is going to be one way to go. We're going to go there. Yes. Right. So one way is to say that, yeah, this is not valid because there's an equivocation. That's why there's a section, remember, called the equivocation strategy, right? But before, well, yeah, this is going to be like the most common one. But I want to really highlight the seriousness of the issue, right? Because the question is whether you can still be an intuitionist if you don't abandon classical logic in favor of intuitionist logic, when this seems to be part of what intuitionism is. Like, how much of intuitionism must you abandon in order to conciliate it with classical logic in a genuine pluralist project? And how can you do it in a principled, non-ad hoc way, right? There you have to do something, and doing any of the strategies that may make this not a problematic argument are going to have severe costs, if I am not wrong, right? First, what is important is that this is, of course, not just a problem with intuitionism and classical logic. I hope you can more or less see that this is going to be a very central problem to a lot, if not all, pluralist projects, because it is widely assumed that there is nothing pluralist in taking different logical systems to be all correct, as long as they are extensions of each other, right? Somebody who believes that first-order logic and first-order classical logic and propositional classical logic are both right is not deemed a pluralist, right? It's just because extensions don't seem to create the kind of pluralism we are interested in. They're not actually reconciliating people who have opposing views in the sense that I mentioned a few slides ago, right? It seems that in order for the pluralist project to be a substantial one, what they need to reconciliate are what used to be called rival logical systems, right? Taking this from Hack, who herself takes at least part of her view of rivalry on work from Ackerman back in the 60s. According to them, part of rivalry is the pretension of being the only right logic, right? So part of being an intuitionist is that there's classical logic is wrong. Part of being a classical logician is to say that intuitionist logic is wrong in a very strong, substantial sense, right? At least that is the way rivalry is usually presented, at least in this classical formulation from Hack in 1975. This is not something that can be put to the side, but an essential part of each logical theory. I've also tried to argue for these things, for why, for example, accounts of logical consequence, especially when you use logical consequence to define logical operators, as important as it is what arguments are valid, what arguments are not valid is also as important and as constitutive of the logical system as the positive ones. Therefore, it is not as easy to put together or to put to the side the part that says that the other logic is wrong. Okay, so if we focus on rivalry, this is going to be generalized. This is going to be generalizable to any pair of rival logics, right? And so what are the options that the pluralist has? One way they can go, of course, is go paraconsistent in the methodological level and say, well, yeah, you can accept the conclusion as long as you also accept the pluralist conclusion that there's more than one negation. So you can say there is one negation and there's also more than one negation. And that's okay because we are paraconsistent and that's the end of it. I know some people in this room who are attracted to this kind of views. So I've heard. Okay, good for you. Okay, but this seems to defeat the spirit of pluralism, right? Because now not any logic can be correct because it has to be like, you have to be like the classical logician or the non-paraconsistent logician is going to have to accept that even if their logic is right at the basic level, in the meta level, either you're going to go monist or you're going to be pluralist again, and that means that doesn't solve the problem, it just kicks it another level, right? So both strategies are not very attractive. You can bite the bullet, that's okay, but at least we should explore whether we have other options before going paraconsistent, right? And there are other options, right? Fortunately, there are many other options. There's a very nice paper from some Barceló 21 about other options you have if you don't want to go paraconsistent, but you still want to keep that both are right, you know. I identify these 5: moderation, atheism, gradualism, and to appeal to ambiguity or relativism. I'm not going to go to all of them because I already have spent quite some time talking, but I'm going to focus on like a couple that I think are, if not the most attractive, they're closer to the stuff that is already being discussed in the literature, right? For example, so I'm going to focus on moderation, ambiguity, and relativism. I'm going to present some the problems they face, besides the well-known problems of normativity and interaction, because I think there's already a lot of literature about that. And this workshop is challenges, so I'm going to present some challenges that are less known than those other problems, right? So let's start with moderation, right? So what do we mean when we talk about conciliating different logics through some form of moderation? I use moderation from the literature on the philosophy of language. So my friends in the philosophy of language, I think they probably already know this, but the idea is very simple. The idea is, for example, this is the a version that at least I got from John Barwise. It's Van Frasen would say things of the similar sort. So the idea to conceive of the different logics and therefore of the different negations of different relations of logical consequence in a way that reconciliates them can be put this way. For example, we can, for example, think that there's a complex systems of factors whose interaction determines what follows logically from what, right? So you say like, oh, the phenomenon of logic is very complicated, right? It's very complex. So it is practically impossible to give a full, complete, detailed account that gives each factor its due in a way that reflects its complex dynamical interplay, right? So this is too complicated. This may be either practically impossible or de facto impossible to include in one system. So instead, Barwise was telling us, we have different logical systems that function as idealized partial models, each one for grounding some of these factors while downplaying others or entirely ignoring other. That is, this is a very strong analogy with how models work in other disciplines. Barwise, he cared not only about science, but also about engineering and other endeavors. He said, we always use partial representations, partial models, and that there are partial models doesn't mean that there is like a whole model that incorporates them, or that you can order them like which one is strictly stronger than the others. They're going to overlap in many ways. If you were here for Anjan talk, he also talked about this. Models, the plurality of models respond to a level of complexity that doesn't allow for an easy unification, right? Because none of those models, none of the logical system captures the phenomenon in its whole complexity, but may still be useful to predate or explain some aspects of it. So if we want to understand logical consequence, it is helpful to have all these logical systems. Each one tells us something, but we should not take them very seriously as saying something about logical consequence per se, itself, or completely, but still it is telling us something, right? Because there are idealization involved, things like that. For my friend Maria. I don't think he was an anti-exceptionalist, but this is still very strong. Like he's pointing to very strong similarities in methodology between logic and other disciplines, as I said, engineering and science. Okay, so the idea is that the plurality of logical systems can be understood similarly to how the plurality of scientific models is understood in other science, as has been already proposed by people like John Barwise. No? Yes? No? De veras, no hay problema. John Barwise. He was my logic professor. One of my logic professors when I was a grad student. Thus, we can look, and also professor, I think, of Sergio Martinez, our colleague upstairs. So that we can look at the literature of modal pluralism in science, so Sanoyama, Van Frasen, Sergio, as I just mentioned, Sergio Martinez, for a blueprint as how to think of system pluralism in logic, right? So this is a very promising way forward for logical pluralism. Just borrow from scientific pluralism in order to have logical pluralism. That is nice. And it's true, it is nice. But when we say that it's nice, it is of course a very moderate, nice, because it comes with its challenges, right? If you're going to go that way, then you're going to recognize that there are going to be some challenges, some hurdles on the way, right? Because there is ample debate as how to understand model pluralism in science, right? So it's one thing is to adopt the methodological principle of say, we're going to draw the analogies, and the other thing is to actually do the work of making those analogies. And if you want to make the analogies, from which account of model pluralism, because of course, Van Frasen is not completely in agreement with Barwise, who's not completely in agreement with Sergio. And mainly the debate is whether pluralism must entail some form of unification or not, right? Whether it is possible, would be like the holy grail, to develop a conception of logic theorizing and modeling as an enterprise sin techo sin muros, to borrow a phrase from Susan Oyama, the pluralist philosopher of science, who herself used the expression in Spanish for some political reasons, which I respect. That's why I use it also in Spanish, right? So there's proof. So the idea is with a roof and with a wall, so this is like very open pluralism. No roofs, no walls. And I also thought she was going to say with a floor, but because the idea is that it's an open enterprise. We just look at whatever logical system we find helpful. Life is good. Life is let million systems bloom and things like that. But the problem is that yes, if you look at the mess, or at the current state of the discussions regarding model pluralism, there are a lot of pitfalls there, right? Because for example, a lot of us may want, like me, to avoid, for example, the anti-representationalist consequences that people like Martinez have pursued, right? So if we look at a case like Sergio Martinez, he started as a model pluralist, and his argumentation had led him to say, like, yeah, the reason why model pluralism works is because models do not represent, right? So if we want to go that way, then we would have to respond whether this is the best way of being a model pluralist, to actually commit to such a strong thesis. Of course, he doesn't think it's strong. He thinks it's just right, of course. But models überhaupt. Yes, all models. No model represents. To think that models represent is a mistake. Natalia Carrillo, she also writes on this, and she said, like, yeah, the right model to draw for the pluralist is that these are not representations. These are not logical systems, then would not even be theories about logical, because they would be about nothing, right? And they have ways of making sense of that. You can go that way if you want. It's okay. I'm not going to complain, but at least we have to be aware that just borrowing from that debate is not just a straightforward taking a solution from here and applying it. It's taking a debate here and applying it in logic. Another problem is that this kind of conciliation through moderation is highly revisionist, because even though some philosophers have actually conceived of their logical system this way, as models, as idealizations, David Kaplan famously, for example, he was like very explicit, yeah, my logical system is an idealization. It's a model that has to be understood as other models in science. Some anti-exceptionalists, Griffith and Passau, they also say, like, yeah, these are all idealization. Many others do not, right? So if the spirit of your pluralism is to say these people are right, and then you turn their theories into models, idealized models, you are not really saying that they are right? You are changing what they are saying, because historically a lot of logical systems were thought not as idealization, especially those that come from Kantian concerns, which are very friendly too, right? People who come from the Kantian conception of logic, like Hilbert and Brouwer, among others, they are not going to agree that their systems are idealizations or models. They're like, no, this is an account of what follows from what. This is already doing injustice to what we're saying. And again, if the pluralist is saying that they are right, then they have to be right. And even when these philosophers think that their logic has a specific domain of application in mind, right? Because it's another way of cashing out what moderation is, to say, like, well, these logics are good in their domain, these ones are logic in their other domain, and that's why we can reconciliate it. Historically, again, that is not how these systems were presented. That is not the project, and therefore that is not what the philosophical account of what follows from what is aiming at doing, right? Sometimes they were competing for the very same domain. And here the basic example we have already been mentioning is the debate between Brouwer and Hilbert, right? They agreed that they were talking about the logic for the same domain, for mathematical proof, right? And so to say that, oh yeah, we're gonna separate the domains and we're gonna give whoever we give mathematical proof as a domain to, either to intuitionists or the classical, we're already deciding among them, and we're not being pluralist. We're just saying, well, if we say, oh, intuitionism is right for proof, then we are going to be already saying that Brouwer was right. If we say, oh, no, intuitionist logic is good only for constructivist purposes, then we're already saying that Hilbert was right, because of course Brouwer would just get very, 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 very mad if you said, like, oh yeah, all you're talking about is just about construction. They're like, no, I'm talking about math. Okay? And I think that's the problem. So I think the problem still holds, right? The argument still has bite, right? It is not as shallow as it might seem, right? Because each one of especially the first two premises, they are philosophically substantial, right? It is not just hubris of the classical or intuitionist logician. It's a central part of the project that they are the only one logic. So okay, so that was the end of the moderation one. Okay, now let's look to the second strategy, which is to appeal to some, say, like, as Otavio already suggested, oh, the argument is wrong because it is question begging against the pluralists. It's already monist because it thinks that there is only one negation. It thinks that negation is a singular term and that it means the same thing in both premise 1 and premise 2. So there's an equivocation there. And that is why this doesn't work, right? So something like this. Premise 1 actually says something like, according to intuitionism, there's only one negation in the sense 1. And the premise 2, there's a different sense of negation. So according to classical logic, there's only one negation 2, right? So now if we plug this clarification, we make explicit equivocation, then the premise works, and the consequence is something that the pluralist can endorse, right? According to intuitionism, there's only one negation 1. According to classical logic, there's only one negation, which is negation 2. And according to logical pluralism, both intuitionism and classical logic are correct, because according to pluralism, there is not only one negation, but two, negation 1 and negation 2. Yeah. Okay, that sounds good, no? More or less. It's a trap. It's a trap, right? Yes, it's a trap, of course. Because the problem is that what this would mean is something like, according to intuitionism, there's only one negation, and negation. But because the next question, of course, is what are these two negations? Why is negation 1 or negation 2? Is this how do we make this translation substantial in a way that captures, that is both true to the intuitionist and classical project, and is not question begging either against or for the pluralist, and is not ad hoc, right? The most intuitive way of doing it, the most straightforward, is to say, like, well, in negation 1 and negation 2, what are they? Well, they're intuitionist and classical negation, right? So according to intuitionism, there is only one negation in the sense of negation 1, right? And that is intuitionist negation. According to classical logic, there's only one negation 2, that is classical negation. So this is something that the defender of the equivocation strategy has to endorse. The problem is that then we need to explain what is the relation between negation 1 and intuitionist negation, so that both premises are substantial philosophical theses, right? Because this is what we want to reconcile, right? We have to recover what is right about intuitionism and what is right about classical logic, right? So this cannot be something like, according to intuitionism, there's only one intuitionist negation, which is intuitionist negation, because that would make intuitionism trivial, right? I don't think intuitionism is saying that there's only one intuitionist negation, which is intuitionist negation. Just like classical logic is not saying that according to classical logic, there's only one classical negation, which is classical negation. If this is what we understand when we're talking that there's an equivocation here, we would not be capturing really what we wanted to capture. We're not reconciling what we wanted to reconcile, which were substantial philosophical theses about negation. We have here two premises that, yes, the argument runs, the argument works, be very nice, the premises are true, the conclusion is something that the pluralists can endorse, but the problem here is that the premises post-constructed become trivial instead of the substantial logical thesis of the original argument, right? So the argument, and also, well, actually, yeah, I said that it was good, but actually, no, it's not even good argument. It's not valid either, because the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises. Yes. Why? Because what actually follows from these three premises is not, at least not directly, that there is not only one negation, but two, intuitionist negation and classical negation. What would follow is that there are, according to logical pluralism, there is only one intuitionist negation, there is only one classical negation, and something must happen here before we can get that there is not only one negation, which is that what we want is at the beginning, that classical negation and intuitionist negation are negations, right? So it is not enough that when we develop the equivocation or ambiguity interpretation, ambiguity is one of the ways of getting equivocation. We just introduce this distinction. right? Because every pluralist project has these two equal challenges that pull in different directions, right? We need this to be different enough that you get two negations. So they have to be different enough that you can reconciliate both the intuitionist and the classical projects, but they also have to be similar enough that it is a substantial thesis to say that they are negations. And this is not straightforward. There has to be something that goes from this being two different things to this being two different negations, right? And the problem is that if we say that what is going on here is some form of ambiguity, we are not going to get that result because that is not how ambiguity works, right? So here's an example of a classical example of ambiguity, right? So we can look at this. Imagine that this is you're in front of this actual room. It's true that there is a work table on that corner of the room, right? And it is true that there is a periodic table on that corner of the room, right? And however, it doesn't follow that therefore there are two tables on that corner of the room, right? And this is the problem with ambiguity, right? Actually, this is in the literature, as Armando would correct me if I'm wrong, because he knows more about these things than I do. This is actually one of the linguistic tests for ambiguity, right? If this is a genuine ambiguity, this should not follow. Therefore, if there is an ambiguity involved in my master argument, where is the master argument? Long time ago. Here. So if there is an equivocation in negation here, then the conclusion should not follow, because that is not how ambiguity works. So that is another problem with the equivocation strategy. And one can say, well, maybe we can cash out the equivocation in another way that is not ambiguity, because as you know, ambiguity is not the only way in which equivocation can happen, right? The other way in which we can get a similar equivocation is if we appeal to something like some form of context sensitivity, right? But the problem is that also context sensitivity is not going to give us the result that we want, because that is not how context sensitive works either. So let's talk about a context sensitive term like close, right? If we use close as an example of how context sensitivity works, we're going to get again the same example, that from two from two occurrences of different context sensitive expressions that are filled with different contextual parameters, you're not going to get a plural, right? So here's an example. There is a bakery close to my parents' house. There's a bakery close to my house. Therefore, there are two bakeries close. This is not going to work, right, either. Therefore, if negation is thought to be context sensitive, like close is, and there has to be some contextual parameter that has to fill what is negation relative to, then the conclusion is not going to follow either, right?
I'm not sure that's the issue, right? Because it's the same sense of closeness.
Yes, it's the same.
You had another premise that my house is miles and miles away from my parents.
Oh, yeah, you can.
And then it follows.
Yes, definitely. You're right. But no, yeah, if you add a third premise, it's going to follow. You're completely right. But listen to what that premise is doing. What it's saying is that if the parameters for which each one of the two context-sensitive expressions are sensitive to are similar enough, then it is going to run, right? And that is what this third premise is doing. And again, this is a problem because I don't think the logics we want to reconciliate are close enough to always going to be close enough so that we can do something like an add a third premise of sort. At least prima facie. Again, this is challenge. It's not looking here, but if you see on the screen, you can see that, yeah, these are the challenges, right? So doesn't work. So what else can the pluralists do? What is still open to? I'm going to mention this, even though I'm very, very interested in it, because I don't have a lot of time. Wow. Not for a long time. Right? Okay, so I'm going to treat it. So I'm just going to mention like other ways you can, other strategies you might pursue, which I think are very interesting if I had more time in my life. I might thought more, which is to reject the thesis that rivalry, in order for pluralism to be substantial, it has to reconciliate rival logics, because maybe extensions, just reconciliating extensions is not straightforward, right? It was a mistake to think that in order for a pluralism to be substantial, it had to try to reconciliate rival logics. Maybe to think in terms of extensions is helpful, because that is not so straightforward, because there's been a lot of debate surrounding extensions, as well as there has been surrounding rivalry. So if you know your history, you know that Quine, Echimendi, Eklund, our friend Gomez Torrente, all these people have already told us that extensions are also problematic. Just reconciling extension is not as simple as I said. So maybe we ought to look at the literature of logical extensions for a blueprint as to how to think of logical pluralism. I think this is very interesting. I haven't had time to think about how to think of logical pluralism as if we reconciliate thinking of these things as extensions, right? So yeah, I don't have time. So yeah, I'll just I'll just skip the last part. We can go back to it if it comes up in the Q&A, but I hope to have, if not shown, at least press the issue that there does not seem to be any sense in which plural thought negation, logical consequence relation, etc., can be useful to the pluralism debate. Because when we use negation, etc., as a predicate, we either use it in a sense that is unproblematic but unhelpful to the pluralist, or in a sense that seems more promising but doesn't actually fit the needs of the pluralist. And therefore, yes, logical pluralism cannot be a thesis that there are more than one negation, logical consequence, etc. That doesn't mean that logical pluralism itself doesn't make sense, but that we need to explain it in other terms. Thank you.
Okay, so,
Right, thanks. That's a really interesting challenge. So I accept it.
Oh, good.
I think there's an important shift in the argument, because the original version you gave, the conclusion was that the pluralists agree that there is only one negation.
Yes.
Right? And then when you reformulate the argument, it was reformulated with a different conclusion.
Oh,
And now the pluralists think that there are actually two negations. One from
yes, exactly.
Now you're talking about entirely different argument.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so the fact that the first argument was invalid, and I think it was, doesn't take away the validity of the second, which I do think is actually valid. Because the second one just says, because there's actually a simple way of spelling out inductionistic negation. For example, a negation which double negation regulation doesn't go through to describe the features that we're all familiar with.
Yes.
Whereas classical negation and all the familiar features that we have.
Yes.
So on that basis.
No, can you repeat those two sentences? Because I want to see how you use negation to formulate the distinction.
Using the following way. So think about inclusionistic negation in which it has regular features. Right?
Yes.
Double negation elimination doesn't hold in general.
Mm-hmm.
That's a feature that holds for classical negation.
Yes.
Right? Unrestricted. Mm-hmm. Right? Excluding middle is a hold in general for inclusionistic negation. That's for classical.
Good.
So on the and similar.
Yeah.
Right? So we're all familiar with the features that are distinctive and different for each negation. I think that this is enough to say that these are different negations, right? Because they have similar, different features. Like why?
Okay, good. No, yeah, good. Go back.
It's, I think it's enough to say, look, here's a property that classical negation has.
Yes, good.
So it doesn't, they're different.
Yeah.
Right? So on that basis, I want to say there is a negation for the inclusionistic logician says, okay, there is one negation, inclusionistic one. The classical logician says there is only one negation, classical one. Pluralist says, well, both are right. Therefore, the pluralist would say that there are two negations, one for each. Right? Yeah. That seems right.
No. Okay, that's what I'm trying to show them now. The short answer is that, of course, yeah, Leibniz gives you that they're different. Doesn't give you that they're different negations, right? Because, yeah, they have different properties, therefore they are different things. But you still owe me an argument of why those two things, why they're negations. If
you want to go there, because we can talk about that, but I think it's a separate issue. Because I think both the classical and the intuitionistic logician agree that when they're talking about denying something, right, negation of something, they think those things should be negations.
Yes.
So.
Oh, no, I don't think, okay. So say like every time you deny something, some negation has to be involved in something.
Yeah,
okay,
that's right. And I think that's how they share that in common, even though they don't spell out, okay, what is the nature of negation?
Yes.
To earn the claim that these are negations. I think
exactly.
They take that for granted. And I think for the simple reason that they agree that knowledge to deny something need a negation. And what they used to deny is what each of one of them called negation. So I think they are agreeing enough on that, even though nothing was said about the nature of negation. I don't think it has to be said, honestly, to settle the debate because of the shared agreement about what negation is expected to do. And that they agree with. That's enough for them to. So it's not as though the intuitionistic says, look, you're a classical logician. You don't even know what a negation is.
No, right? I think that's what we're saying.
The Brouwer said lots of things, but he didn't say that, what he was talking about negation was not negation. He says it's the wrong negation. It's a different thing.
I don't think that's what he says. He says that is not negation. That doesn't even exist. That operator, even if it exists, is not negation. Because negation behaves this way, negation doesn't behave that way.
Now, if you want to go quiet, I think this is quiet. I don't think this is, but okay, if you want to go quiet and say, okay, you're changing the subject now. We're talking about something else altogether, right? Sure, you can, right? I think that would require then, because I thought the debate that we were considering, that you had enough common features so that it could run the debate without settling the issue of the nature. But if you want to think, no, I'm going to go quiet. And said, I'm going to change the subject matter now, right? There's only one negation, classical negation.
Yeah.
Anything else, true. We cannot have a negation in which both the sentence and its negation are true.
Yeah, exactly. That is not negation.
That's not negation.
Of course.
So, but I don't think you find that in Brown, honestly.
Okay, I will have to go back, but...
but that's a separate
that's historical issue.
Now we are in a terrain where we have to discuss, okay, what the nature of the negation is. Now, that doesn't mean that both parties cannot agree, again, on some minimal core of what the negation involves, right? And it's much easier to run that argument between the classicist and the intuitionistic than it is between the classicists and the paraconsistent.
Yes, definitely.
Right? Because here's something that
more or less
have in common, right? Negate, exclude. Right? That's a feature of classical negation, the intuitionistic negation. Yeah. If they have that, that won't be enough for them to say, look, yeah, we have a debate about these two negations, right? And then we're back to what I said before.
Okay, yes, I think you're right about the dialectics, but I don't think you're right about the positions. I think because I think it's very, very straightforward to say if we put aside the historical claims about the classical and the intuitionist logics, we can still have, if you want, classical plus. And classical plus is going to tell you, no, there's just negation. Exclusion is not enough for something to be a negation, right? So you can use exclusion to classify some operators, and that is why I included Roman 2 to say, like, yeah, you can do that. You can recognize that these things have some things in common, and you can say that is why they are negations. But that is not going to capture the debate, because the debate is not about what else besides exclusion we want. Because if that is all there is for something to be a negation, then we already have an answer. Whatever other properties we add to that one, that is going to be a negation, right? So it again trivializes the intuitionist and the classical position. Because you're saying like, oh yeah, you are right because your negation excludes. And of course, the classical logician is like, no. My negation is one that has to be taken in consideration, not because it's exclusion and some other things that could have been different. It is because it's capturing negation.
Yeah, but I thought that what we needed at that point, we established that we are talking both the classicism and the illusionists that are talking about negation. So not that they characterize.
Yeah, exactly.
But that the characterization they're going to disagree. But they can agree that both are talking about negation.
Yes, indeed.
Even different characterizations for that.
Yes,
that's what I meant by the exclusion.
Oh, but again, so that is the part I didn't have time to go into. That was part 4. Like, if you go that way, again, you're only going to get different hypotheses. And again, it is not what you want. You want them to both be right. And once you add the right, then you're going to go back to the previous debate. Because
But then now you have to tell right and mutual respect.
Exactly. Right. That was like what I tried to say a few minutes ago. So you don't have to move the pluralism somewhere. You just you have to move it. No, because to me it's historically inaccurate. Well, at least it is not going to, again, even if besides the historical point, there is not going to be generalizable. At least there's going to be at least some rivalry that is going to try to aim at the same domain.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah, good.
That's okay.
Okay.
Good. Okay. We'll talk more. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that was very, very helpful. I'm glad that it's recorded because very helpful. Awesome.
I was about to stop you guys because we have,
I'm sorry. ¿Cómo estás, Lucía? Gracias.
Thank you for the talk. I'm just thinking about a possible way, an alternative one of diffusing your master.
Yes.
And I need to elaborate this idea, but just tell me what do you think. As I understand, intuitionism and classical logic are logical theories.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. Whereas logical pluralism is a theory about logic.
I don't think so.
Okay, so
okay.
You can say that the master argument doesn't work because the claim involved in premise 1 and the claim involved in premise 2 are claims made are first order claims. Are claims made in the context of logical theory, intuitionism or classical theory or classical logic. But the conclusion of your argument is a second order one. So there is no conflict between claims in the first order and in the second order one. So the argument doesn't work.
Great point. And the short answer is no. No, because it's premise 3. You're right. Premise 3 is of second order. You're completely right. I don't know if I can show again the slide. No?
Okay, no. My point
the conclusion is back to
the conclusion of your argument is a first order.
Yes, exactly.
Pluralism, which is the negation of the conclusion, is a second order one.
You are granting my conclusion.
You don't have conflict between first order claim and second order.
If you're right, then you have considered my conclusion. You're saying logical pluralism cannot be the thesis that there's more than one negation, because logical pluralism is a second order thesis, and the thesis that there's only more than one logical negation is the first one, which is part of what I wanted to say. Therefore, one cannot be the other. Right?
I don't understand.
Okay, here I got it. Okay, so you're saying pluralism is a theory about logical theories, right? It's a second order theory, right? And you also grant that the conclusion, the thesis that there are more than one logical negation, is a first order claim, right? And you also think that first order claims and second order claims are substantially different, right? There's not that you can say one thing in one way and then saying in the other. They're going to be complex relations, but at least they're different claims, right? Therefore, it follows from your argument that logical pluralism and the hypothesis or the thesis that there is more than one logical negations are different. Therefore, that was my conclusion. So you agree with my conclusion. My conclusion was that logical pluralism is not the thesis that there is more than one logical negation or logical consequence, etc., etc. This is the problem, right? Because you're saying that exactly. Therefore, you have to reject one of the two premises you just gave me. You either have to reject that logical pluralism is a second-order claim, or you're going to have to reject that that there is more than one negation is a first-order claim, or you're going to have to reject that these are different claims.
Yeah, but it's clear that there is more than one negation. It's not a first order.
But he said that he was.
The way that it's been defined, because it's not a logical claim.
It's not a logical claim.
So in that sense, it's not first order.
Well, okay, but I think what he meant is second and third, right? So because the premise one is about a logical theory, and the premise 3 is about logical theories of the first level, right? That is more or less the claim. Yeah. So I'm not saying that I hold this, but I think that if you hold this, then you're going to have to accept my main conclusion also.
In the first order, yes, but pluralism is.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Okay, so before the next question, is there anyone else who wants to participate? This is just so I know how much time we have for each of the remaining questions. So raise your hands now.
Yes, a quick one.
Yes.
In your examples of your premises, you mentioned only classical logic and intuitionist logic. But have you thought about logic that has, let's say, two implications or two negations? What would you say about that?
Okay, I haven't thought about that, but I thought about something really close, which is, of course, my original debate with Luis about whether there's one relation of interpretation, or how would we adapt this to question about how many truth values there are, right? Whether this is going to be similar or not, right? So what happens if we have, if we try to do this, for example, for truth values, right? So here, in a certain sense, we want to say that there is something monist about saying that there's only two truth values, right? And the pluralist regarding many-valued logic is going to have to say that there is some sense in which there are only two and there are also more than two, right? And here, I think the argument is going to run you're going to have to do just a little bit of semantic adjustment, even grammatical adjustment, right? So that you can say, so the premise 1 is that there's only two truth values. Premise 2 is that there are more than two truth values. So premise 3 is that they're both right. And premise 4 is going to be like what? If you only give me 2, then that's not going to work, because that's going to give you the first, they're going to give you just a classic or some form of bivalence. If you say that there are more than 2, then you're going to be betraying bivalence. So the argument, I think, is going to work in an analogous way. I think it works better for relations of interpretation, because relations of interpretation are only one. So it's going to be close to like relations of logical consequence. But you're right, it's not straightforward. It is. So yeah, I made some idealizations. Yeah, you're completely right. Thank you.
Okay, so I have Ethan and Luis over here, and then hopefully there's time. We'll go back to you, okay?
Christian, por favor. You are welcome, Christian.
Was very strange, your conclusion of.
I know. That was the point.
What is your opinion about? I conclude that if classical and intuitionist logic are correct, then both connective of negation are correct for the same domain. Why? We have negation, but the problem that it is indifferent if you use one of other negation, but you have two negation.
Okay, so you're going again for a consistent, right? Yes, yeah, I consider it. Just if you're not convinced about my challenges to parallel system, well, I mean, there are challenges again. Yeah, you can go that way. You have to, as we have already argued in previous occasions, you are going to have to explain how why a pluralism at the first level can be is not defeating the spirit by a monism at the second level, or how we can get pluralism at the second level without starting regreso al infinito, an infinite regress, right? So those are the challenges for that position, but it is available, of course. Okay, good.
Really confused.
It was a confusing talk, definitely.
I think so many crucial concepts in the talk are not fine. For example, what makes something useful for pluralism?
Yes.
What is your target pluralism to begin with? I don't know if it is domain pluralism or the pluralism that says that two logics are correct for exactly the same domain. I don't know what the target pluralism is here. Also, I don't know what are the needs of pluralists. All those expressions are clear to me.
Okay, good. No, that's not good. Because
I take those as comments. And yeah, there are other
slide number 2, you were already lost.
Yeah, numbering the slides could have been very helpful to me.
Oh, that's true. I didn't put. No, I'm sorry. I can only do that. I didn't.
There is one slide. You have the Susan Hack picture.
Yes.
For example, and there you reconstruct rivalry as debate between monists.
Yes.
And I don't think that's necessary nor part
of
the
that's a very good
rivalry.
point. Yes.
It's just a debate between one guy saying this is right and the other is not right, and vice versa.
Yes.
But there are no honest or pluralist claims there.
So that's a very good point. I disagree, but you're right that I just didn't give it enough. Yeah, you're completely right.
More arguments and reasons.
Yes.
To think of rivalry in those terms. And also I need more arguments to think that being honest at the methodological level defeats the spirit of pluralism. I don't think it follows from what you say that you should be honest at the methodological level, but even if you are, but
yes,
that fits the spirit of pluralism. The methodology is just a different domain of inquiry, so maybe it has some logic, and you can say pluralism.
Completely. Okay. Let's start with the first one because I think it's more important. And can you project? No, because it's on this one, right? But yeah, can you project on? Okay, so yes, this is for me. It is very important that my target is not a pluralism. It is pluralism, logical pluralism, right? So of course the question is, what is my target? What do I mean by logical pluralism? And that is why wait, it's not doing anything. It's not doing anything either. Okay, but so that's why I started with, I'm sorry about my quote from my 2022 paper, right? Good. Okay, where is it? Where is it? Okay. Yeah, why this is not targeting a sort of pluralism? Because what it targets pluralism, what pluralism is. And unless I am wrong, pluralism is a project that is motivated by this. by trying to reconciliate competing accounts that have been conceived.
Exactly the same.
Exactly. Yes.
So
So it is, okay, yeah, this is only the motivation, you're right. What I mean is that pluralism is a way of, for a project to be genuinely pluralist, it has to give a solution to this challenge. It has to, it is not enough because the monist, of course, also gives us a solution, right? So it has to be one that is, it goes on like 2 sentences ahead. It says like, in order for what we want is to do one that actually recovers these intuitions that are recovered by each one, recovers both in a way that that also explain why they had reached an impasse, and so it gets like all the good things from each one of them, and also explain why they haven't been able to, you haven't been able to solve it in a honest way. You don't think that is what pluralism is?
Monist projects do exactly that. That they are able to recover different intuitions and explain how they are compatible. And
you're right. You're completely right. Yeah, but I don't know how to say it in a non-circular way, because I'm sorry, in a recursive way, exactly. Because the best thing I can come up is that they try to solve this by saying that they're both right. And that is the actual premise that plays a role in my arguments. They claim that they're both right. Is that better?
Yeah, because I think in that sense,
yes,
the monist would not end with, look, we have these equally well-grounded potential answers. They're conflicting. The monist said,
one is not as well-grounded.
Right?
One is not as well-grounded as the other.
Sure, we have two. One is wrong, the other is not. And
no, because they would say, no, they are equally well-grounded, but there was not actual conflict. The conflict was just apparent.
But that's not monist. The monist would not say.
Yes, I was assuming that would not be counted as monist. Yeah. For me, at least.
So look, there are these two.
Yes.
No, I mean some. Let's say in this way, accomplished monist, which trying to explain some conflicting intuitions, and sometimes they do that by saying no, the conflict was just apparent.
But that is what the equivocation argument does. So I was thinking that those kind of arguments count as part of my target. So to the question of who was my target, that includes those people. I don't know if that is how other people use pluralism, but at least that was part of my target because of what I think pluralism is trying to accomplish. So what makes something a pluralist is that. What is it trying to accomplish? How, and not the actual theory. There are a lot of strategies along. Pluralism is a sort of project. That is why I always presented it in terms of a project, in terms of a debate, and that is what we need to ask whether for that debate, for those projects, plurals are helpful or not. That doesn't seem to have helped a lot. I'm sorry. Okay, then let's go to the, I'm sorry. Okay, let's go to the other two. And the second one, I already said, you are, one of the other ones, you're also completely right, but I still think I am also right, which is good. Really? Exactly. Because, okay, so regarding the, okay, so right, the idea is you are completely right that just because two logics are rivals, that doesn't mean that they are both monist. You're completely right. That is still good for me because all that is necessary is that at least some of them are monist, and therefore monist accounts cannot be reconciled. Even the conclusion of my argument is restricted to monist rival positions like intuitionism and logical, it still has a lot of bite, right? It's still telling us that, that plural predicates are not going to be helpful to formulate pluralist projects that try to reconciliate monist logics. Is that better?
No, because I'm lacking understanding of this expression. It is helpful to this other thing.
Oh yes, that is true. No, that is completely, utterly missing. I mentioned like some desiderata, right? It has to be non-question begging regarding either pluralism, non-pluralism. This has to, I don't know. It says, yes, I left it very intuitive. What does it mean for something to be helpful for the debate? And that's something I have to do. You're right. Otherwise, I don't know. You may be right that I haven't shown anything substantial. Well, not anything substantial, but it lacks a lot of substance that we don't have. And the third one was, I forgot.
Honest.
Okay, yes. I also went very fast with that one. But I think I have an answer, which has to do with, we're right, with, what was it? Oh, it was, you're right. What does it mean to say that you have defeat the spirit of pluralism? Is got in order for me to like really substantiate what does that mean, I'm going to have to get into the universality or non-universality of logic and to see whether seeing meta logic as a restricted domain is going to be helpful or not. Maria is gone, so I cannot make the joke that I wanted to make. Well, she's somewhere else. So the drawing is. Okay, so yeah, I was feeling too self-conscious about referencing too much of my work, but there's another paper that goes into domains. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, so I'm also been working on whether domain specificity can do that job, right? Whether you can say that the spirit of pluralism is not defeated because you actually have like domain specific at the first level and then domain general it's the other way around, right? Domain specific at the meta level and in neutral regarding whether it's domain specific or not domain specific. Now I'm seeing that what I wrote was not helpful because what I wrote was about the other way around. And so yeah,
and this is important.
Yes, it's
to me because I have seen these sort of claims in
yes,
I know. Oh, you're monist at the meta level, so you're a monist all the way. I simply cannot follow that. What's so special about meta logic that being monist there makes you truly a monist?
Fortunately, I'm not saying that. That would be really bad, right? Yeah. But it seems like I'm saying something like that. That is why bullet 3 is there. There was like an IE in here, so that I think bullet 3 is a little more specific, right? So it restricts how you're going to understand your pluralist. So I'm not saying that you cannot be a pluralist. You're going to be a sort of pluralist that, for me, defeats the spirit of pluralism, but at least, yeah.
But it's not right either, because you can have a specific logic at a topological level for which detachment doesn't hold, and then you don't get it. You're assuming that you can attach rules from your premises to get a contradiction, but if you, for some reason, say, oh, well, if the logic attachment doesn't hold, you don't get contradiction, and that's very consistent enough.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right, completely right. So, yeah, this is wrong. You're completely right. It will allow for the relevant kind of very consistent logic. Yeah, you're right. Okay. No, you're right. Those are challenges to my challenges to logical pluralism. No, you're completely right. Just to challenges. You did? That's a good title. Okay, I'm going to correct it right now on my computer because that is the presentation.
It's been a good discussion, but I think the wisest thing right to do right now is to thank Axel again for his book.
Before you move, I'm going to take a picture. Don't get up. Just a couple of seconds. It's going to take a little bit for me to.